Hi, I'm John with the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by one of my colleagues, senior editor Amy Frykholm, who is also the host of the podcast In Search Of. We're going to talk about the second season of the podcast, which is just kicking off. But first, Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to do one of these videos as I've been following your development of them over the last year or so. So thank you so much for having me. And I am a senior editor at the Christian Century, and I've worked for the Christian Century for a long time. But a couple of years ago, I got this idea to start a podcast. I mean, everybody's starting podcasts, so why not us? Why don't we just dive in? So I started a podcast that's called In Search Of, and this is a podcast about searching and not always finding, which I realized is one of my great gifts in the world, to search and not find, something I do really well. And I was trying to kind of nail that space, where you can ask good questions and, ponder the answers, but maybe not always nail the end result. So that's why I did that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, for those who didn't get a chance to listen yet to season one, can you tell us a little bit about how the first season went? Like some of the topics, some of the guests, anything that was stood out to you from the first season of the show?
Yeah, so I started the first season just trying to think about well, I had just gone on a pretty incredible search. So that was part of the impetus for the podcast, which was that I had gone in search of, this is pretty literal, I mean this pretty literally. I had gone in search of this saint, Mary of Egypt, who's a 5th century saint, and she lived in Egypt and in Jordan, Palestine, Israel. So I followed in her footsteps and looking for understandings of her, signs of her, kind of turning this 7th century document that I had of her life into a sort of map and then walking my map. And it had been a pretty mind-blowing experience, honestly. I mean, it is sort of amazing what happens to you when you go in search of something. Things do find you, even if it's not exactly what you thought you were going to find. So I based the first season of In Search Of on that kind of wandering that I did. That kind of wandering the desert was sort of my thing. And I actually talked to a lot of people in that first season about things that had struck me while I was on my trek to find Mary of Egypt. So, I mean, some of my favorites were, like, I talked to this amazing ethnobotanist named Gary Nobhan about food in the desert. And he helped me kind of imagine, like, what would a desert mother hanging out, with the weeds, what would she eat? And how would she go about that? Um, so he helped me think about that, as well as thinking more broadly about food culture and food traditions. And so that was pretty amazing. Another favorite was talking with theologian Wendy Farley about the possibility that God is in search of us, and that when we go on a search like the one that I went on, oddly enough, we're being met all the time by the God who's looking for us. So that was a pretty profound interview for me. And another one I'd highlight just for fun for people looking for interesting things is Carmen Acevedo Butcher, the first interview of that season. My favorite part is that, like, she bursts into song and she starts singing in Old English, which I was like, when I heard her do that, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is why you have a podcast, because you can't get somebody to burst into song on the page. It just doesn't quite work. So that one was, and she's a translator, I should say, and she was talking about her translation of Brother Lawrence's work, and she's come out with that book, which is called Practice of the Presence. So
Yeah,
it's a
I love
pretty
that
awesome
interview.
thing.
Even when she wasn't singing, I love that interview.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those. She just is so alive and such a great presence, and herself like such a idiosyncratic searcher. So she describes in there like her translation process, and I don't know. It was really fun for me
mhm.
to explore that with her.
Yeah. So in the second season, the theme of the podcast is truth, the search for truth. I'm curious, why did you choose that to be the theme for the new season of the show?
Well, so in the first season, it seemed like we were going in search of things that couldn't be named, and that was really awkward. So it's like, in search of what? I don't know, in search of stuff you find in the desert. So it was a little bit awkward in that way. So I wanted to kind of nail it a little more. I wanted to kind of thematically draw in a little bit more closely for the second season. But at the same time, I mean, I was curious, like, what happens when you go in search of something you know for a fact you're not going to find, like truth, right? Like big T truth. I don't think we're going to find that. And so made me curious was the possibility of looking for truth in different fields of thought or thinking, exploring that with theologians and physicists and historians, maybe journalists, like people who look for truth in different ways in their particular work or field. And that has proven to be super rich and fascinating as I've tried, but also kind of odd because, it's a big thing, truth. It's not an easy thing to explore or uncover with people. You can't just ask them, so what is the truth? And then get an answer.
Yeah. So I know you've already done a lot of the work for this new season. Could you tell us about one or two of the conversations and some of the things about truth maybe that you're hearing or learning?
Well, I am beyond excited about tomorrow's interview, which is with Elizabeth Schrader Polzer, who is a biblical scholar. So one of the places I went looking for truth was in biblical studies. And her story is just, it's so remarkable. And I think that her story is one of those that is going to shape how we see the field of biblical studies for the future. Like, I really think this is a big deal, what she's after in her scholarship. But what she's taking on in this, what we talk about in this interview, is Mary Magdalene and the tradition of Mary Magdalene, and how when you take textual criticism and you put it together with kind of the broader understanding of first century Christianity, you start to get a picture of the kinds of controversies, the kind of difficulties, the kind of struggles that might have been a part of a figure like Mary Magdalene's life. And you just start to see Mary Magdalene in a whole new way, which then, of course, for me, makes me see the texts, to see the Bible, to see the Gospels, to see all of these texts in a new way. So I'm pretty excited about that interview. And if you are listening, you definitely need to tune in to hear this if you're even remotely interested in the Bible, because it will be a little bit mind-blowing, I think, or at least it was for me. I can say that. So that's what I'm super excited about. I'm very excited and terrified, quite nervous about an interview that we're going to have with a woman named Zia Morali, who is a cosmologist and also a journalist. And she has a PhD in cosmology, but she's taken her PhD on the road, so to speak, in search of a language that will help people like me interpret this field of cosmology and quantum physics, particle physics. So I'm really excited about that interview. I don't every day feel like I have the chops to have that conversation with her. But we're going to do it anyway. And she is an amazing translator of these experiences and of this thinking that's going on in physics. So the search for truth in physics is going to be a part of that interview. And I could not be more excited about the person that I'm going to have it with. And then a third one I'll highlight, just because, I mean, I'm excited about all the interviews in this season, but a third one that I will highlight is an interview that I had with John Thetamanil. And it's an interview about interreligious truth. But John just takes us on a journey into like such profound understanding of what it might mean to have the truth emerge among or between or in religious dialogue. And so I really am excited about listeners. See, I always think in readers because I've just been working for a magazine for so long, but I'm so excited for listeners to engage that. And I'm curious what they're going to make of it.
Yeah, those all sound really fascinating. And you're not the only person, I can assure you, who doesn't feel like they have the chops to talk about cosmology with a cosmologist. But I'm really excited to hear your conversation with her.
I'm excited too.
Yeah. So by the time you out there are watching this video, at least the first episode will have already dropped for season 2 of In Search Of. So right now, you can click below in the video description. We'll have the link to the website for In Search Of. All the new episodes will drop there. You can also sign up there for our weekly newsletter, where each week you'll get an email that will give you the newest episode that's dropping, along with some bonus content from Amy and the Christian Century. So check that out below. Amy, thank you so much for being here and chatting about the podcast.
You are so welcome. And let me just also say that you can find this podcast on any podcast app. So Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find this podcast there. And that you can also listen to season 1. If you
Yes. And if you don't listen to podcasts anywhere and you don't have any of those apps, you can also, right in your web browser, right on the Christian Century's website at the link below, also listen to the episodes there. But thank you for that reminder, Amy. All right. Well, thanks so much. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me, John.